Hey guys, it's Shadow the Rat, and for today's video, I thought I'd go ahead and talk about how I got my first 3 rats. And I actually haven't mentioned this on here, but I thought it would be worth talking about because unfortunately it was a pretty bad experience. And it actually almost threw me off having rats altogether. And it kind of also might give you a perspective on people who are not a fan of others getting pet shop rats, because unfortunately the main reason my experience was so bad was because I got the rats from a pet shop. And I should mention that I'm not shitting on pet shops, and obviously I don't have anything against people getting rats from pet shops. Many of my rats have come to me from pet shops either directly or indirectly. However, I do think that when you go to a pet shop and you get rats that way, you do have to be willing to deal with the potential consequences of them usually not being bred really for health and temperament. And so you don't really know what you're going to get, because you absolutely can get great rats from pet shops, but you can also get skittish and aggressive rats or unhealthy rats. The chance of your rats being, consistently healthy and well-tempered is a little bit lower than if you're going to like a good breeder, or even a rescue, where most of the rats they get there are actually from pet shops originally, but the thing with rescues is they're actually going to assess the rats for temperament and health, so you'll know a little bit more about them before you bring them home. Versus like at a pet shop or feeder bin, it's very much more chance and luck of the draw, because you can't really tell a rat's temperament or health from a 5-minute interaction period. Anyways, let's go ahead and get back to the main thing, which is how I got my first rats. So back in 2015, I lost my last gerbil Diamond, and after her, I knew I wanted to get some rats. So a few weeks after that, I started to look for some rats in my area, only to find that it's very difficult to find rats in my area. Now, a big part of this is because at the time I did not realize how prominent rat groups are on Facebook. Facebook is seriously like the only place you can find most rat breeders, rat rescues, and so forth. It's crazy. I don't know why they're all on there, but that's where they are. So if you're looking for a rescue or breeder or rats who need to be rehomed, or if you have to rehome rats yourself, Facebook is the way to go. And I know it sounds weird, but I literally only use it for rat stuff. So you can definitely find people in your area with rats going the Facebook route. But at the time, I did not know this. And because of that, I was just trying to Google, like rats in my area, and I could not find anything. And my local PetSmart, which was where I had gotten all my gerbils and hamsters and so forth, they had stopped carrying rats several years before. And so I really had no idea what to do. And so I started to call the PetSmarts that were a little bit further out from me. So the local one is around 15 minutes away, but they didn't have rats because they hadn't had them in years. Although recently they have started carrying them again. I have no idea why, but anyways, like I said, I ended up calling the ones that were a little bit further out from me, 45 minutes to an hour and a half away, which were kind of reasonable distances in my mind, although I could not drive at the time. I was 16, but I didn't have my license yet. Thankfully, my mom was nice enough to drive me out there. Anyways, like I said, I was calling all the local PetSmarts, and as I found out, there was indeed a PetSmart about 45 minutes away from me that had 3 females left. 3 female rats, that is. And they told me that they had had these females for several months, and they also didn't know when they were going to get in more rats. Now, for those of you who have watched my video on why I don't have male rats, this store is the main reason. Because I got my first 3 rats from that store, and PetSmarts only carry 1 sex of each animal that they sell. And obviously they do make mistakes time to time, although thankfully I haven't personally had any issues with that. I definitely know people who have, but this store only carried female animals, so as a result I got female rats, and I've had a running group since then, so that's why I have female rats. Anyways, as I was saying, the store had 3 female rats, and they were several months old. I judged them to be around 4 months old, but at the time I didn't really know, rat ages. Although looking back, I would say that I was pretty much spot on. They did look like they're around 4 months old from all those, old pictures I have and so forth. But anyways, I went to the store with my mom, and we got all 3 girls. And I made a really big dum-dum mistake because I did not refresh my knowledge on rat care. So I had studied them a lot the year before when I had been looking at like rat training videos and stuff for my gerbils. However, I didn't really look into them since then, which was not a good choice. And as a result, I did not remember what a critter nation looked like. Now, that might sound like it's inconsequential, because there's tons of good cages out there that aren't critter nations. However, I wanted a critter nation because it has so many good features, like the doors open fully, it has good bar spacing, it's easy to cart around and stuff like that. So I wanted that cage, but I forgot what it looked like, so I got a cage that I thought was a Critter Nation, but it was not. And it was a awful cage. It was a good size, it had good bar spacing, but the doors were tiny. The legs broke pretty much as soon as I got it, so that made it very difficult to use. It required so much work to assemble. I mean, even with me and my mom both working at it, it still took like an hour, which, I mean, I can assemble a double Critter Nation in like 15 minutes. So I was very much not pleased with the whole situation with the cage, but that was definitely my fault because I should have looked into what the cage looked like first. And PetSmart at the time did actually carry Critter Nations under their brand. I think it was All Living Things. Their new Fool Cheeks brand has a different cage. However, it is very similar to the Critter Nation, but it's not the exact same as the old one was. So at the time, I definitely could have gotten a Critter Nation from PetSmart, but I didn't. That was definitely a poor decision on my part. I also didn't really look into what bedding they needed, so I made the mistake of getting paper bedding, which is not super great for absorbing their pee, and is also very dusty. I also ended up getting some not super safe toys, like one of those edible logs, and my rats didn't have any negative impacts from those, thankfully, but you know, it's just the little things that you really should look into first, which definitely was my fault. You know, I should have refreshed my knowledge before getting rats, and I didn't, which isn't great, but thankfully I did learn from it, so I think my current rats definitely have a better life than my past ones did. Food-wise, I did do pretty good. I got them Oxbow, but I did get the young rat formula, which is just fine for them, but it's not really necessary. It's a little bit high in protein, even for growing rats. So I could have just gone with the normal Oxbow adult, which I did later switch all my rats to, but, you know, at the time, that's what I got, and that is still quality food, so it wasn't too big of an issue. Overall, I definitely should have refreshed my knowledge before getting rats, and I also should have gotten all the stuff before I got my rats. That was my second biggest mistake, because you never want to be building your rat's cage the day you get them, because that's just extra stress. It's stress on your part, it's stress on the rat's part. You want everything to be set up so you can just bring your rats home, put them in the cage, and let them adjust. But yeah, that was not a great decision on my part. I definitely don't do that now. Now I set up everything beforehand, but it was a bit of a learning experience. So, you know, to anyone looking to get rats, I definitely recommend getting your stuff first, having it all set up, and just trying to make everything as seamless as possible adjustment-wise to lower the stress on you and your rats. Anyways, moving on to the rats themselves, when I saw all three of them, I knew immediately that I wanted all three of them, especially because they had been there for several months already, plus the fact that the store wasn't planning on shipping in any more rats for a long time. And as I learned later on, it's actually best to have 3 rats or more, not only for a better cage dynamic, because rats are actually natural group animals and not pair animals, but in addition to that, if one of your rats unfortunately passes early, this helps to ensure that you're not going to immediately have to go out and look for a cage mate. And unfortunately, this is a little bit of foreshadowing because I learned this the hard way. So I bring my rats home and I'm so excited, and you know, they're pretty skittish, but I was thinking, okay, they're pet store rats and you know, they just came home, so I wasn't too bothered by that, even though of course I wanted to make friends with them as soon as possible. So I was giving them treats and I was sitting next to them and talking and just trying to make friends with them like I would with my gerbils. And one of the rats in particular, a rat called Ninja, which was named by my younger brother, she was the most confident one. And she seemed so sweet and outgoing, and I was super happy that at least one of my rats seemed to be pretty confident. Well, one of the things I noticed with Ninja is that shortly after I got her, she started to sneeze a ton. Now, you might have heard of this thing called new home sneezes that some rats go through because they have very sensitive respiratory systems, so new environments can sometimes make them sneeze a little bit for a few days, and this is just like nothing but them just adjusting to the new allergens and stuff in the area. So that's what I thought this was because I had read about this, and I thought, okay, she's probably just having new home sneezes. Well, unfortunately, that was not it, because the next day, which was my second day of having her, I found Ninja super cold and fluffed up and breathing very heavily. And I immediately freaked out, of course, because holy heck, my new pet is very sick. And I was, of course, beating myself up because, you know, the sneezes were obviously the first sign, but I couldn't tell. And honestly, I'm always terrified when I get new rats and have them sneeze because of this experience, because, you know, with new rats, you just can't tell what's normal behavior for them. So for the first few weeks, it just kind of scares me thinking that, oh, I might miss a sign of them going downhill, even though I've had rats for over 8.5 years now. But anyways, going back to Ninja, it was very clear that she was very sick. And so I immediately told my mom, and she, the amazing person that she is and huge animal lover, she immediately got us a vet appointment and we went into the emergency vet. And it was actually a school day for me, but you know, she called out for me and all that, which I thought was, you know, super sweet. My mom's really amazing. I feel like I don't credit her enough. But she got us to the vets, and as we got to the waiting room and checked in, and the vet tech came to call us into the waiting room, unfortunately, Ninja took her last breath right as they called us in. So when the vet came in, she basically told me that I should get Ninja necropsied and recommended that I do it at the vet school. I live in a college town and we have a vet school, although they mainly focus on larger animals and livestock, but they will do necropsies on rats and for a much cheaper price than the local vets. So she recommended we go there, and that's exactly what we did because we wanted to know exactly what happened and how we could protect my remaining 2 rats. Now, I had also brought the 2 other girls with me to the vet appointment because I didn't want Ninja to be, extra stressed. And it's good to bring cage mates along with the rat. And by the time you see symptoms in any rat, your other rats will have already been exposed. So typically it's best to just leave them together. So while I was there, the vet did examine the 2 other rats, and she told me that they both looked to be in perfect health. More foreshadowing here, by the way. So anyways, after that, I brought the girls home. And it was a really awful situation, but I tried my best to just keep bonding with them. And I was very glad at that point that I had gotten 3 rats because, well, one of them had passed away, and my local PetSmart was not the one with rats, so there's no way that I could go and, exchange her for another rat. So at that point, I was definitely extra vigilant and freaked out that something was going to happen to my 2 remaining rats. And unfortunately, I was right to be vigilant because 2 days later, Shadow became super lethargic and she started doing this abdominal breathing where her entire abdomen was going in and out with each breath. So she was really struggling. And I found her like this at like 9 o'clock at night. So again, my mom and I had to rush to the emergency vet. Anyways, I rushed Shadow there, and the vet took one look at her and was like, oh my god, she's doing really badly. So she immediately got her on oxygen, and they started her on albuterol treatments and antibiotics and all sorts of stuff. So they were doing their best for her. But one thing I didn't mention is that this vet we were going to, it was a general vet with no vets there that specialized in exotics. So not the best place to go, and I did end up transferring vets later on. But that was kind of another mistake I made where I did not search for other vets in my area that were better with exotics. And I had always taken my hamsters and gerbils and so forth to this general vet, but that's because my mom had found it. And by the time I got to the age where I had rats, I was definitely old enough that I should have looked up, vets in my area that were better with exotics like rats. But, unfortunately, this was a very much a live and learn situation. And since then, I have found all the vets in my area that are good with exotics, so I have a little bit more choice, and I know who's going to give my rats better care. Anyways, thankfully, Shadow did actually get pretty good care at the general vet, and like I said, they put her on oxygen and a bunch of medications to try and help her breathe. And around this time, we also got back the necropsy results from Ninja, and that came back telling us that she had viral pneumonia. And given how quickly it popped up, it must have been something she brought from the store that was probably exacerbated by the stress of a new home. So it was definitely a very cruddy situation, but at least we knew what Shadow had, so we knew that our treatment should be effective. Although, of course, the problem was that since it was a viral thing, it was very difficult to treat. It was more of a we prevent secondary infections with antibiotics, and we try and support her breathing until her own body can fight off the virus. So it was definitely a difficult situation, and it actually took Shadow a long time to recover. But she did recover, and it was a pretty crazy moment because Shadow did not make a huge recovery that first day, and when the vet called to update me on her progress, she was like, she's stabilized a little, she's eating a little, but she's not doing super well, and we don't think she's going to recover. So I went in the next day fully expecting to put Shadow down, and I just felt so awful at this point. I mean, I just was crying and just a mess. I just didn't want to have rats anymore, honestly, because it was such a bad experience. And so heartbreaking. And when I got there, there was this vet tech who had been caring for Shadow all night. And he brought her out and was snuggling her and was telling me, oh, she's so sweet. She's going to be the snuggliest rat when she grows up. And after hearing that and talking to him, I couldn't go through with putting her down. And so I decided to instead just take her home and try my best to nurse her back to health. So I took Shadow home and I kept her in a little travel cage in my room for the next 2 weeks. And I would give her medicine, every 12 hours, and I would give her supplementary feedings with ferret bite paste and baby food and other liquidy foods pretty much every 2 to 3 hours. I was trying to keep her hydrated and eating, and during this time, me and Shadow really bonded. She had gone to the vets, initially being the most skittish rat of the 3, as she was super freaked out by handling and would barely take treats from me when I first got her. But after going to the vet, she completely changed personality. I mean, she became super confident after that. She really seemed to have realized that, we were trying to help her. And after that, she was just a completely human, social, and loving rat. and she did amazing with people. And from that point onward, she was just, so cuddly and confident and just really the most incredible rat. Which is why all my rat social media, like this YouTube channel, is named after her, because she became my first heart rat. So yeah, like I said, I took Shadow up to my room and for the next 2 weeks nursed her best I could. And after that, she actually started to improve quite a bit. It was very slow improvement. It took her about 2.5 weeks before she was really acting pretty normal again. And at that point, I went ahead and took her back downstairs, which is where I usually keep the rats in our finished basement. And I went ahead and started to rebond her to her sister Sonic, who unfortunately was alone for those last 2.5 weeks, although of course I was caring for her. And yeah, that is pretty much the story of Shadow. After that point, she was super healthy. She didn't have any more issues until she was around 2.5 when she started to develop a mammary tumor. And unfortunately, a month and a half after that, when she was around 2 years and 7 months with some change, she ended up passing away. But that was a pretty good life for a rat, and even though it was really awful going through all of that when I first got her, I never regretted getting her, and I feel like she actually saved my love of rats. If Shadow had not survived, I probably would have not continued to have rats. Now, the final girl in the group, my girl Sonic, she did not ever develop the respiratory issues that her two sisters did initially. However, unfortunately, she did develop them at 16 months and passed away subsequently, even though we got her oxygen and went the whole 9 yards again. She just didn't make it. So that was really awful. And I always felt like it was kind of triggered by the fact that, unfortunately, at the time we had a house fire. And even though the rats were not affected at all, the house fire was like upstairs and the rats are downstairs, and I was able to get them out really quickly. But even though the rats weren't really affected by that part, they were affected by the stress of having to, go and live out of hotels and friends' houses for a while. And so it was just pretty stressful on them. And I feel like Sonic in particular is a very skittish rat because unfortunately she was extra skittish, easily one of the most skittish rats I've had. She just didn't deal well with the stress. And I feel like that contributed to her developing her respiratory infection and subsequently passing away. So that really sucked and kind of just completed the trifecta of really bad experiences getting my first 3 rats. But yeah, all in all, I'm very glad that, Shadow was one of my first rats in particular. And I'm also very glad that I got to care for Sonic because she kind of taught me to be more patient and just to kind of work with skittish rats at their own pace. Anyways, that's pretty much the story of my first 3 rats. I do think the PetSmart was a little bit at fault when it came to Ninja's passing and Shadow's health issues. And the reason I say that is because they definitely had something viral, which must have come from the store itself. And both I and the vets at the time agreed that this must have been the case because I just hadn't had them for very long at that point, so they wouldn't have been impacted that strongly by a virus in my environment yet. So I don't think it was anything in my environment or any care on my part. It was just a very unlucky combo of probably something running around in the pet store, which can happen. I mean, they do have a lot of live animals there, unfortunately, and a combo of the stress of coming to a new home, which unfortunately does lower their immune system some, even if they are very confident like Shadow was. So the combo of a lowered immune system plus them having this virus, that just was not a great combo, and unfortunately did lead to Ninja's passing and Shadow getting sick for a significant period of time. Although, like I mentioned, thankfully we were able to help her recover. So yeah, like I said, that's pretty much the story of my first rats. There were some things that I definitely didn't do right, even besides going to a pet store for my first rats, which I don't personally recommend people do just because you do have a lot more chance involved. But in addition to that, like I mentioned, I just didn't do enough research first. I had done a lot of research on rats the year before when I had gerbils and I was kind of looking into rats. However, that being said, I should have refreshed myself, and that would have definitely helped to prevent a lot of issues. And I also should have gotten all my stuff first because that would have made a big difference and allowed me to change anything that wasn't correct before actually getting the rats. So, yeah, overall, it was kind of a combination of things that made this experience so difficult. But ultimately, I'm very glad that I got to have those rats. And I'm also very glad that I continue to have rats today because I find them to be really amazing pets, and they're definitely one of my favorite pets out there. So I plan to have them for the foreseeable future. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!